Hey, what's up, guys? I'm just going to be going over how to install Docker and Docker containers today. I'm sure you've heard this plenty, but Docker, the main difference in between Docker and virtual machines is that Docker actually uses the kernel of the host machine instead of actually having its own independent kernel. So this comes with some benefits and some drawbacks. If you're going to be using Docker, you have to use the same kernel as your host OS. Say, for instance, you're using Linux, you have to use Linux. Docker containers. You can't actually use a Windows Docker container, and there are workarounds for this, but to keep it simple, if you're going to be installing a Docker container, it has to be using the same kernel as the host OS, and that applies the same for Windows. Say, for instance, you're using Windows and you're installing Docker containers, it has to be a Windows kernel that is running underneath. Unlike a virtual machine that actually has its own independent kernel and can actually run itself independently, but one of the big benefits of this is also that a virtual machine is dependent on nobody else but itself. So that means it can run independently, but the downfall of that is that it is a lot more demanding on your system versus a Docker container because you have a full-blown operating system underneath. Now, to install Docker on Linux, and this is what a lot of people have an issue with, at least I had an issue with it to start out with, is actually finding the right repository and also repository key and stuff like that. So I'm going to walk you through it for Ubuntu today. So just like adding repos with GPG key signing, we're going to be doing that. So I do have the Docker repository for Ubuntu right here, and also we have the key right here. So you're just going to add this to your repository, and if you are looking to install this repository, for instance, like on a Red Hat distribution, I do have this link in the description so you can actually check that out, and you can actually get your own repository for the package manager that you are using. And then after you do that, you pretty much have, for me, it's going to be apt install docker-ce, docker-ce client or CLI, and containerd.io, docker compose plugin, and that will download all the dependencies that you're going to be running into for Docker. Now, if you're actually looking for Docker containers to install, they actually have a community just like GitHub.com called hub.docker.com. So you can go there to look up whatever application you're looking to run on your server, and they will have a list of a bunch of community created Docker containers that you can actually install from their repository. So it's very similar to GitHub if you're used to that. Now, some of the commands, and I will be having more videos on Docker, but I have a couple of the simple ones right now that you're going to want to know. Docker run, and then you're going to have to put the image name, Docker PS, Docker start, Docker stop, and then you have to put the actual container. And I'm going to show you, like in Docker PS, this is going to be the running Docker containers. If you have to actually put a -A here for it to actually look at all of them. So and for more details, you can actually go to this guide right here, and I'm going to be putting that in the description too. So now let's hop on the browser and let me show you some of the different websites you can actually find these at. Alright guys, there's going to be a link in the description below. You can actually come here. This is going to be for Linux, so you can see that you can install it on Ubuntu, Debian, or Fedora. Now these are actually going to be installing it from source if you end up going about it this way, and a lot of people will say that this is the better recommendation because you can have the most up-to-date Docker version. The way I'm actually doing it inside of the video is actually just adding Docker to my repository, and then I can actually download it from that source instead. The problem is a lot of times the way I'm doing it is actually adding it to my repository, or adding the repository to my system. It can have a more out-of-date download of Docker, and you can run into issues with newer Docker containers. And so it is recommended to install it from source. I can make a video on that if you guys want to see that eventually. But and here's my other link. It's also going to be in the description if you want to install this for Mac, Windows, and obviously you still have Linux. For the third link I have down below, this is Chris Titus Tech. He has some good content. I also have his YouTube video down below. If you want to see a nice list of commands that you can actually run with Docker, you can also watch this video, but here are big list of commands if you need something quick to pull up to actually remember the commands. And the last thing I got down in the description is actually this Docker Hub, and you just sign up here and you can actually install any of the Docker containers that they have listed on here. It works a lot like GitHub. Well, let's hop into the terminal and let me show you how to install Docker. Alright guys, so the first thing we're actually going to do here is add the repository, so I'm just going to write that out here. All right, if you have more questions on actually how to add a repository, this is pretty much doing GPG key signing. So right now I have the repository right here for Docker, and it's the first of all, you're just putting the location of where the GPG key location is, and right now I'm putting in an etc apt key rings and docker.gpg, so that's the location, and this is the stable version, and it's also going to ask you what type of version of Ubuntu that you're going to be running, so that's why I got this LSB release running right here. So this is just a standard variable that will actually tell you what version, which we got Kinetic. Now we're just going to actually add the GPG key, so I'm going to write that out here real quick. Okay, now that we added the GPG key signing, or the key signature, where we can actually install everything, but first I gotta do an update, so let's do an apt update. Okay, the first thing I'm going to be installing is apt install docker-ce and docker docker ce-client CLI and contain.io and docker-compose-plugin. Alright, let's install these. Now to actually tell if we got Docker installed, the first thing we can actually do is just run a docker run hello world. Okay. Now that you see that we pulled that down, it'll actually just give you a little introduction to Docker and say hello from Docker and give you a little message right here. Now if I do a Docker PS right here, you can actually see that we don't have any containers running, and a good way of actually managing Docker is Portainer. It helps you learn the environment and also have a little bit easier control and a nice GUI to look at. So we're going to actually pull down Portainer right now, and then you'll be able to see some more of the commands that you can actually use. So let me just type that out and I'll explain what it's doing. Alright, now that we just installed Portainer, you can see that it pulled everything down since we didn't actually have that container already installed yet, and now it actually is running. If I do a docker ps right here, you can see that this is actually our container and it's called Portainer. And now if I do a control L here and just look up here, now what this is pretty much doing is it's saying docker run, which is a command, and now we're actually putting the ports in right here. So the actual port that we're going to have to look up is 9443, and the name of the actual container that we're calling it Portainer. And it's also saying that whenever we restart our system, it's going to run it automatically, and just information on what it's actually pulling down. Now I'm actually going to look that up real quick. Now to look up Portainer, we're just going to do a https://// and this is most likely going to be your local IP address. But for me, I'm using Linode, so this is going to be a public IP address. So I just type that out there, and then the port's actually going to be 9443. So let's go ahead and enter into here. Alright, now that we're in here, it might ask you, because it's not a secure connection, it's going to be like, hey, do you want to proceed? You just click yes. Now you can actually put your new password in here, so let's just put something in real quick. Okay, it must be at least 12 characters long. Okay, so, alright. Let's create a user, or an admin user. Now you can go inside of here and actually start messing around inside of here and the different environments, and you get a nice GUI interface for controlling all your containers. So I don't actually have any containers. I can actually go over Portainer some more in another video, but this is the basics and at least getting you started on Portainer, and you can actually start messing around with here and actually having a way to control your containers. So let's get back into the terminal. Now that we're back in the terminal, I'm just going to go over a few more commands to just how to control your container. So if I do a docker ps, okay. Oh, geez, can't type today. Okay. Now, right here, this is our container ID, so this is what I always use. And you can also use the name of the container, but I just copy that, and if I do a docker stop, and then the container ID, you can see if we do a docker ps, it's not running anymore. If you want to actually see where it's at, or if you want to see what containers are installed even if they're not running, you can just do a docker ps-a. You can actually see both of our containers right here. And if you want to start a container, all you have to do is docker start and then our container ID. And now if I do a docker ps, you can see that it is running. If you want to remove a Docker container, let's say we want to remove the hello world container, let's just copy this down here. Okay, so now I can do a docker rm and then our container name, remove it. Okay. Now if I do a docker ps-a, you can see that all we have is the Portainer now. So the main ones that you're going to be using all the time is docker start, docker stop, docker remove, docker run, and that's the main gist of it to get your feet wet and actually start using it. Now if you want to have a container not start up on boot up, all you have to do is do a docker update restart equals no, and then our container ID here. So let me just copy that. And now if I restart my computer, it's not going to restart on boot up. So now if I want to have it start up again, like say for instance you install it and you forget to actually have it start up every time you restart your device, all you have to do is a docker update and restart, and put unless stopped, and then our container ID. Okay. Now, every time that we restart this device, it's actually going to restart with it. Well, hopefully that was helpful for you guys and helped you out with Docker a little bit. And it's really nice. I mean, you end up looking at all the opportunities that actually open up whenever you actually use Docker. You don't have to create everything yourself or work around a lot of troubleshooting issues, a lot of the stuff that you've heard. So try messing around with it. It isn't too bad, and maybe I'll get into networking if you guys want me to. So talk to you next time. Peace.